And hi everyone, I think we've got quite a few people on the call today, so good afternoon and thank you for joining me today at our GCSE Science summer term update. I managed to take some time off to rest over the Easter break, and I know it's going to be a very busy term for a lot of you, and hopefully this event will be useful to you. My name is Helen Nathwani, and I'm the Senior Qualification Manager for GCSE Sciences. I'm here today to talk you through the general support available, as well as the science-specific content that we have, and also give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have at all. I've already noticed some people have started putting some questions in the group chat, which is fine. I hope this session will help you navigate the support that's available, as well as ensure that you've seen all the relevant pieces of information from JCQ and from Pearson to help you with arrangements this year. This session, just as a reminder, is scheduled for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, so we should be finishing at around 5:15. If you have any questions related to what I'm talking about, so as I'm talking through the slides, then please put them into the group chat and I'll answer them as I'm talking through the slides for you. If you have any other questions that are not necessarily linked to what I'm talking about, but that you need answers to, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, and I'll go through all of those questions at the end of the presentation and make sure that I've covered everything there as well. So just to start us off, I have a very quick poll for you, which should come up on your screen now. So if you can just fill in how confident you're feeling with the arrangements for summer 2021. Where 1 is not at all and quite nervous, and 5 is you know exactly what you're doing and you just need to get on with it. So I'll just give you about 30 seconds just to fill that in. Sue, I've just seen your question. Does this presentation include information for iGCSE? No, it doesn't. This is specifically for GCSE Science. However, a lot of the information is the same for iGCSE Science. There is a specific unseen assessments for iGCSE where there is information on the website about that. But if you need any more details, then please contact us using the details at the end of this presentation. I just saw your comment in there, so I thought I'd mention that. Okay, so how confident are you feeling? Looks like the results are a lovely bell curve, so you're all in the middle-ish. Hopefully this session will help with that and we'll be able to answer some of your questions as we go through today. Okay, so just as a quick agenda then, as I mentioned, I'll be talking you through the key dates and deadlines for GCSE Sciences. I'll then go through the support available for summer 2021. There are lots of links in this presentation to make sure that you have access to everything that you need. I'll also go through the other support available for GCSE Science, so not just linked to summer 2021, but the additional support that we have available as well. And then I'll give you an opportunity to ask any additional questions that you might have at the end. Just seen a question as well, what will the tag procedure be for ELC and will it need to be completed for the deadline of 15th? The procedure is exactly the same as for GCSE. So the idea is that it will follow the same dates as GCSE, i.e. submitting grades by the 18th of June. And you will be assessing based off of however much your students have been able to do and demonstrate. So it's not finishing everything like you normally would for ELC, but based off of the evidence that you have to hand at the time of submission. So the idea is that we're delaying the submission to as late as possible, but I will double check that. I'm pretty sure it's the 18th of June, same as the GCSEs. Okay, just to give you a bit of a general context then, I won't spend too long on these slides because I think a lot of you are probably aware of this already. Obviously, students will receive grades and they're awarded and determined by teachers. They'll only be assessed on what they've been taught. There isn't an algorithm that we're using this year, and you'll be able to draw on a range of evidence when determining grades, including things like the use of the additional assessment materials that are put together by exam boards, mock exams, any other work that you might have completed as part of your pupil's course, such as essays, in-class tests, end-of-topic tests, that sort of thing. We've got lots of guidance and documentation on our website, including our training website as well, and I'll talk you through what that is later on in this session. And a couple of dates there for you. So obviously the submission deadline is the 18th of June, results days for GCSE are the 10th for GCE and then the 12th for GCSE of August. So there's a quick slide here on timelines. Obviously, we are already halfway through this. So we're on sort of the 19th of April. So we've just released grading exemplification on our website. So if you've not seen that, there is a link in this presentation deck, but make sure you have a look at those. The next deadline coming up is the deadline for your centre policy, which needs to be submitted by the centre admin portal, which you can access via Edexcel online. That's for your whole centre, so that won't just be science teachers doing that, it will be the whole school. And just to make sure that that is in place and ready to go for the end of this month. The next submission window is the opening of the main submission window, which opens on the 26th of May. So you've got a little while until that opens, and that's open until the deadline of the 18th of June. There is a nicer presentation of this if you click on that link at the bottom of those slides. I don't think you'll be able to click on it right now because it's in presentation view, but you will get sent a copy of these slides and the recording, and you'll be able to access all the links after the session today. If you click on that key dates link at the bottom, it gives you a nicer presentation of the dates rather than it being on a PowerPoint slide. Okay, just to talk you through very briefly, because I'm aware that a lot of you probably have seen this, the JCQ guidance that was released on determining grades. So that was released at the end of March. They have also released an editable centre policy, an assessment record sheet, which is optional, but you can use it. It's probably a nice way to use to collate the evidence that you're going to be collecting. There's a head of department checklist, which is optional as well. And there are grade descriptors that are on their website too. We've also put together a top important things to digest from that document on our website, which might be a quicker document to read, so you can have a look through that as well. Just seen a question there about the optional assessments. I will answer that question when I go through them in a few slides time, but don't worry, I haven't missed it. Okay, so in terms of the quality assurance process, there are 3 stages. The first stage is writing the centre policy and making sure that your school is adhering to that across the subjects. The second stage is effectively checking the centre policy. So that's where exam boards will be looking through the centre policies, getting in contact with centres to either help clarify or add any additional detail that might be required. And then the third stage is just sort of either targeted checking of particular evidence, and that will be towards the end of the process, so kind of towards June, July time. So in terms of the actual quality assurance process, as I said, it's in 2 parts. The first part is an internal quality assurance, which is mostly around your centre policy, and lots of the information that you will be following in terms of the internal quality assurance processes will be outlined in your centre policy. So it's just making sure that you adhere to the recommendations that are in that. The second part is then the external quality assurance, which is when the exam boards will be kind of working through that with you and possibly contacting you about that. In terms of guidance on grading, it's important that grades represent a holistic, objective judgment based on the evidence of each student's performance. And the recommendation is that you should be trying to use the same piece of evidence across a whole class or cohort where possible. So, for example, it might be a past mock paper that you've sat with the whole of your cohort. It could be an end of topic test that everybody's done. It could be using the additional assessment materials that we've provided. Whatever the evidence is, and the idea is that you try to do that for the whole cohort. And if that's not possible, the recommendation is that you outline and you explain just why that might be, whether that's because some students were away or they were self-isolating, they weren't able to do it, but just kind of having an explanation in there to kind of show why there is different pieces of evidence being used if that's the case. In terms of the access to all of the documents, the best place for you to start, if you've not started looking at all of this yet, is our guidance documents, and you can see a very small screenshot there of the Combined Science one and the first page of the Combined Science one. Hopefully you've seen that. If not, there are links on our website and on this PowerPoint to them. But that is meant to be your one-stop shop for all of your links to all of the other support that we're providing. So if you have that document, that means that you then will be able to click out from it to all of the other support that we have on our website. And it's just meant to be one place that kind of takes you through the key dates, it takes you through the assessment materials, and then just talks you through the other support that we have available as well. So if you've not seen those, make sure you have a look at those first, and it will just help you navigate all of the other support and documentation that we've got on our website. So in terms of actually arriving at a grade, the recommendation is that there is a 5-step process. And for a lot of you, this is probably very familiar in terms of arriving at grades for your students. The first step is considering what has been taught. So in terms of students may not have had access to the full course, you may not have been able to teach all of the content. So what has been taught due to the pandemic, in what depth have you been able to teach it? The next thing to consider is what kinds of things count as evidence. So are you using the Pearson produced materials? Are you using coursework if there is anything? Are you using any sort of device tasks that you might be putting together, or records of performance across the study like end-of-topic tests, that sort of thing? So it's deciding what evidence you want to use. Linked into that is the quality of the evidence. So for example, does that reflect the actual position that the learner is in? So if you're looking at a test that you did at the beginning of year 10, that may not necessarily reflect the grade that a student is working at now at the end of the course in year 11. So it's just about evaluating the quality, also the confidence that you can have in a piece of evidence. So for example, did you do it under exam conditions? Was it done in a set time frame? Was it something that was a piece of homework, which means that you may not know how a student has sort of taken that, has been working on that piece. So it's not that some evidence is you can't use, it's just being able to evaluate that evidence as scientists based off of the evidence that you're going to be using, and just making sure that you sort of weigh all of that in when you make your decisions. Fourth thing there is looking at the proposed range of evidence and is it suitable for all students? So this is linking to what I was talking about relating to trying to use the same piece of evidence across the cohort. And then finally, assigning a grade based off of the evidence that you have available. And again, the reminder just that the submission window is the 26th of May until the 18th of June. Louisa, I've got a question from you saying, could you say a bit about high, medium and low control? So what constitutes high, medium and low? So high would be you've done something under exam conditions, for example. That's probably one of the highest types of control, because you're regulating the types of questions, you're making sure that it's covering all of the content that they've been taught, you are limiting them by time, you're making sure that everyone has the same access to or not access to a textbook. They're kind of sitting there, they're doing it under exam conditions. Medium might be something like questions that you've pulled together that are predominantly exam style questions perhaps, but they're more used as an end of topic test, or something that is less controlled, but still very relevant, still very useful, still looks at the way that students asked to answer exam style questions, or content in depth, or covers all AOs. That would be slightly more medium. And then low would tend to be things like if you're doing homeworks, or you've got an extended piece of work that a student has done that isn't necessarily linked to the exam content, but can still be used as evidence, can still be used to kind of show the level at which a learner is showing, but it's maybe not as, you may not be able to have as much confidence in that as you would in an exam style question where an entire cohort has sat a particular exam in the same time frame, for example. I hope that helps. But if that doesn't, then please ask another question and I'll try and add a little bit more detail to that. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention was grade descriptors. So grade descriptors have been created for GCSE, AS and A-level subjects, and they describe mid-grade performance. So the GCSE grade descriptors have been created at grades 8, 6, 5, 4 and 2. And each awarding organisation has created grading exemplification for each spec. So these went up on the website this week. So if you've not seen these, there's a link at the bottom of the slides here. to help you find those exemplification documents. They are split into 4, so you've got biology, chemistry, physics, and combined science, and they are student examples of student responses to questions that examiners have pulled out that represent the mid-grade of each of those grades listed at the top there. And they also have a bit of a commentary for each of those exam questions and answers to kind of show why that would sit in that particular area or in that particular grade. I'm just seeing a few questions coming up here. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. We're under the assumption that it's fine to use different types of evidence for combined and separate cohorts. Is this fine? Yeah, that's fine, as long as you explain why you've done it. So as long as you sort of say, this is what we're using for combined, this is what we're using for separate science, and you're making it clear what you're using for what, that's fine. They're different qualifications. Our school wants us to set some new exams of unseen questions, but we have already used all the 2018, 19, 20 questions in preparation tests. The additional questions are... Oh, just lost the question. I think someone typed in another question, so my screen jumped. Apologies for that. Additional questions are the same. Are there any new ones? Okay, so the additional questions are basically questions that come from unseen materials, and by unseen that's been defined as anything that is padlocked. So yes, that is the past paper questions 2018, 2019 and 2020 papers that have been effectively broken down into the individual questions and then put together according to the individual topics. They're not completely new questions. They are just a rejig of the past paper questions that already exist. Sorry, someone's doing another question, so it's just jumped again. The additional, okay, so are there any new ones? There are not any new ones. This is something that Josephine Ofcol have required us to do in terms of what they wanted us to release for the additional assessment materials. So all exam boards are doing the same thing. In terms of the assessments, I think the idea is that these assessment materials shouldn't be, okay, you must now sit all of these papers now that we've received all of these questions. The idea is that you should hopefully be able to use the mock papers that you've already done as part of the evidence gathering that you are now going to do. So if you've already used the 2018, 19, 2020 papers, then there may be some evidence that you've already got there that you then don't need to use the additional assessment materials that we produce, because you've already got that information that you've already done as part of that work. So then all you would need to do is look at the grades that a student got as part of that mock, and then bring it in as part of your evidence. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. Grade descriptor link isn't working. No, the link won't work because it is presentation in presentation view. So as soon as I send you the slide deck, you'll be able to click on all of the links then. Next question. How many pieces of evidence do students need? It's a good question. So that depends on what is in your centre policy is the shortest answer to that. So for example, if your centre policy says that you will have 3 buckets of information, of evidence, you then decide, okay, so for the first one, I'm going to use a mock paper that I've just done with my students. For the second one, I'm going to use some of the questions that are a part of the additional assessment materials. And for the third one, I've done an end of topic test on this topic, so I'm going to use that one. So that's just an example. That's not what you need to do. You don't necessarily need to use 3 buckets. You might use more, you might use fewer. But the idea is that you should be using your centre policy to guide you, to tell you how many pieces of information evidence you should be needing to use there. I'm just trying to go back to make sure I don't miss any of these questions. What steps will exam boards take to ensure there isn't grade inflation, or is it simply expected this year? That's a good question. As all of you know, last year there was quite a big jump in the inflation of grades, and And I mean, partly I think we're sort of expecting that may happen this year again. But the recommendation from Ofqual and JCQ is that any alignment that you're doing, any data that you're looking at, you should be trying to align to 2019 or previous data when you're looking at comparing cohorts to previous cohorts and that sort of thing. So someone's saying, is it okay for us to use the 2019 grade boundaries to make grade judgments? Yeah, that's fine. Just make sure that that's something that you have said that's what you're doing. So if you say in your centre policy that's what you're looking to do, also remember that it's not just meant to be one piece of evidence, but it's meant to be a holistic view. So you shouldn't just use one piece of evidence, but kind of look at a couple and then see how you think that reflects how your student is learning. Past paper questions or exam material mark scheme don't display AO1, etc. Where can you find these? They are on the assessment mapping grids. So if you go to the course materials section of our website and then go to 2021 exam support, that's where you'll find the additional assessment materials. That's also where you'll find the mark schemes. And there's also another document called the mapping grids. That is where you'll find the information on assessment objectives, topic coverage, high, medium, low demand of the questions. So that's kind of the mapping of the types of questions that we put together. So that's where you'll find those. Someone's just answering a question there. That's helpful. Thank you. Grade boundaries for the 2020. Oh, that jumped there. Grade boundaries for the 2020 October papers are very low. Do Edexcel believe these are valid and should we use them? So the 2020 October papers, that's the autumn series that we ran last year. Obviously that is not a full series, so that was not run with the normal number of entries that we would normally have. So obviously the grade boundaries might be slightly skewed. So I would suggest, if you are looking at doing a mock, maybe using the 2019, or don't necessarily use the grade boundaries that are there, but use the grade exemplification. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I use the right terminology here. Use the grade exemplification that we've given you for GCSE Sciences, so you can see what a student answer looks like at a particular grade, and use that to help you determine where your students are sitting, because that's sort of a recommendation for where your students should be. So hopefully, if you look at that, that will give you a better idea of, sort of where your students are. Okay, I think I've answered most of the questions, but I will double check, and don't worry if your question hasn't been answered, because at the end of this session, I will go through and do a mop-up and just make sure that if there are any questions in there that I've missed, I'll make sure that I put them either in the notes of the presentation that gets sent to you, or it'll be in the email for the presentation that gets sent to you after this session as well. Okay, there's a quick note here on use of data. So I'm just going to read this through very quickly. So one source of data which is available is tracking systems that provide target grades or predicted grades based on assessment inputs and data modelling. As the policy direction is that the final grade is derived solely from performances produced by students and not a prediction, a grade derived from a predicted trajectory or target grade is not permitted. So if you're using this appropriately, data on historical student and centre performance can help support the internal quality assurance process for assigning grades. And the purpose of reviewing data on past performance is not to attempt to determine a student or centre's outcomes this summer, but it should be one source of evidence from examination series which operated as normal. And then that can inform your professional judgment on the level of attainment achieved by your students. So the other thing to be aware of is that the distribution of grades awarded to students in previous June series. However, grading judgment should not be driven by this data. So historical grade data should be used or considered only after grading judgments have been made. So this was taken, I think this is from the JCQ document or the Ofqual document, but it's basically just saying that any sort of tracking systems that project what a student would get at the end of the course, that's not enough for your evidence. You need to be looking at what a student has actually produced and make your grades based off of that. Okay, so just a quick note here, and actually both of these have been released now, but in terms of the additional assessment materials, you had the questions, mark schemes and mapping grids, which is what I was talking about, which gives you the assessment objectives, and other additional information about the questions. And then on the 12th of April, additional support materials, including the exemplar responses and links to other information as well. So that was the student exemplification documents there as well. So in terms of the support materials for GCSE Science, that's a link there that you'll be able to click on. There are overview guides, which is the one that I mentioned, which then sort of links out to all the other documentation. There are additional assessment materials arranged according to topics, and those topics are linked to the specification. There are mapping grids for the additional assessment materials, which gives you content such as spec references, demand, etc. There are grade exemplification documents, which is what I've been talking about, which includes marked examples of students' work from past papers and examiner commentary across the 3 sciences, and training as part of the Pearson Professional Development Academy, which is available at that link there as well. And the Pearson Development Academy, I just want to make sure that I tell you what the courses are that are available. These are all free, but if you haven't seen it yet, we've got courses on how to arrive at grades, centre policy overview, and assessment support, which talks you through the assessment that's available as well. So if you want any additional support on any of those things, and there will be more support available on there as well, please make sure you have a look at the PD Academy, which is linked to the bottom of this slide, and sign up for those courses as well. Just a couple of notes on reasonable adjustments. I won't read through those right now, but they are in your slide deck, so you'll be able to read through those if you need to. A quick note on appeals as well. So students will be able to appeal grades this year. It's a very simplified process. So effectively, if a student is unhappy with their grade, they would first ask their centre to check whether there has been any kind of administrative or procedural error. If there hasn't been an error identified, then the student can ask the centre to appeal to the exam board on their behalf, and then the centre, sorry, this is my hay fever kicking in here, when the centre does not believe an error has been made. So you can submit to an exam board, and then the exam board will consider the evidence and make a recommendation there as well. So those are and there'll be a lot more information and a lot more training on what the appeals process will be, but that's just a general overview of what the appeals process will be there. Good question. What can we tell candidates before grade submission? So you can tell them what pieces of information you are going to use as part of evidence. So you could say, I'm going to use this mock paper, I'm going to use this past paper, but you can't tell them what grade you're going to be assigning them. That has to happen on results day. So hopefully that gives you a distinction there. So the idea is that students should be aware of the work that you're going to be using to as part of the evidence, but you can't tell them the grades that they will be getting ahead of their results day. So just a few quick notes here on communication, just to make sure that you are aware of the common communication and the comms that are going out, the emails that are going out. Another question I've just seen come up there, can we tell them grades for the pieces of work? That's a good question. So if you read the JCQ documentation, it says you can give them results for individual pieces of work. It doesn't say grades, it says results. So I would interpret that to mean you can give them the marks that you have assigned them, but you can't then tell them the grade, because then it would be very easy for you to go from a grade on an individual pieces of work and then work out what the average is going to be, for example. So I would say that the JCQ document has been very explicit in saying you can give them the results from that evidence, but it specifically hasn't said grades, it said results there. So hopefully that's how I interpret it. And I think to err on the safe side, I wouldn't give grades for individual pieces of work, but if you're looking at marks, individual marks, then maybe you can. Has it been made clear to all centres that 2020 questions are on the additional materials this meeting made explicit? It should have been, but I can double check that and just make sure that we've got that in our communications there. The only use I see for grade descriptors, I can see that a few of you have been talking about grade descriptors and the genericness of the grade descriptors. The reason that we've put together, or that all exam boards really have put together the grade exemplification, is hopefully to help make sense and to give examples of what those grade descriptors actually mean for the subjects that you're teaching. So if you're looking at a particular area, or if you're looking at a topic, then you can hopefully use the student examples and the examiner commentary rather than looking directly at the grade descriptors, which are, I agree, they're quite general. But hopefully the grade exemplification will give you a little bit more detail as to sort of what that means for science. Sarah, interesting question. Do we get paid for all the marking we're doing for the exam board? I wish I could say yes, but we are looking at the fees that you pay as part of the entries, and we're not sure what this looks like yet because we haven't been through the process, but I've been told that they are going to look at what the costs are, and then any sort of cost saving that we make because we're not using examiners in the same way will be passed back on to centres. So we are going to be looking at that. I think we did this last year as well, but we'll be making sure that any sort of savings that we make, we don't want to profit from this, will kind of go back to the individual schools. Okay, so I can see a few people chatting on here. I'm going to move on just to make sure that I get through all the content here, and then I will come back to the questions. Okay, so information and support. So this is about the Pearson Development Academy that I was talking to you about. So the training sessions that are available on there. You can sign up to see what training sessions are as they come available, or you can have a look at the website and just see what there is available now. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about training on how to arrive at grades, centre policy overview, and assessment support as well. And there's just a few links there to sign up to our Qualifications Bulletin. If you haven't done that already, that's where we use, that's the main way we use to communicate lots of the information as and when it becomes available. And just a quick note on the mock service as well. So if any of you are looking to use the mock service for summer 2021, then there are key dates and deadlines for that. You can make sure that you get in on the particular booking window for using the mock service for this year. And there are key dates and deadlines and links in there as well. There's also, I don't know whether you've seen this, but we have put together lots of information for students, parents and carers on a dedicated webpage. So there's a video and a letter from our assessment director explaining what's happening this year. There's also a link to a student timeline so students can understand sort of what's happening when, and a feedback form and a link to the off-call infographic, which is quite good, that explains sort of how grades will be awarded this summer. So if any of you are talking to parents or students about this, then please feel free to use any of the information here too. Okay, so this is the final section that I wanted to talk you through. So what's new from the GCSE Science qualifications team? And I know there are questions that are coming up, so I will go through them, I promise. Okay, so the first thing is why science matters. I just wanted to remind you about the content that we're producing aside from the 2021 support around our why science matters idea and the focus that we have for that. So don't forget that we're still working on all of our STEM content to support engagement in science. We've got our Scientific Spotlight series. So this is a new version of our Scientists of the Month, where this year we're looking at focusing on particular events or days, and we're using those to promote particular scientists or particular areas in science. So the latest one will be Earth Day, which is tomorrow, and there's a Scientific Spotlight there as well. So have a look at that. We are also releasing our View from the Lab podcasts as well. So they are our regular podcasts and you can listen in. They're not very long. They're about 20 minutes, I think. to our science team, chatting to lots of thought leaders, science education specialists in our regular podcasts. And our most recent ones are got an evidence-based science teaching with Adam Boxer. So if anyone is on Twitter, you might have heard of him. And also Cracking Practical Science with Natalie Hewitt and Sarah Longshore as well, talking about practical work in science. And there are lots of other ones on there as well, and we've got more coming. So if you are interested in our View from the Lab podcast, then please have a look at that. There's also our STEM careers poster and blogs. So if you've not seen our poster, there are little blogs that kind of go alongside the STEM careers there, where we've got people who are working in those careers who've written a little blog about what they do. So it's not completely all there yet, because we've not managed to film all of them because of restraints from last year, but there are quite a few there already, so please have a look at those as well. We've also got, I'm sure all of you know all of this already, our core practical videos. So there is a web page for all of our core practical videos, for all of the practical videos in GCSE Science. So please have a look at those. And there's also a PDF copy, which is the one that you can see there on the screen. And that then hyperlinks out to all the YouTube links for all of the core practical videos as well. So if you haven't seen them, then there are links on this slide deck to make sure that you have access to all of those. We also have our Mastery in Science pathway, which is a way of teaching the science content from Year 7 up to Year 11 using big ideas. So the idea is that you can have strands of big ideas moving from Year 7 right up to Year 11, and it spirals all the way through. And the idea is that you can consolidate previous knowledge with your students, add an extra layer of that understanding each time, and then it gives you regular formative assessment points there as well. We've got a webpage that tells you a little bit more about what Mastery in Science is all about, where there's a guide. You can sign up for updates to hear as soon as we release more content. The Year 11 pathways are out. The rest of the pathways will be out by the end of this term. So you'll be able to have access to all of the content there and have a look at our Mastery pathways. I've got another quick poll for you, and while you're filling the poll in, I'm just going to try and have a look through the group chat and just see if I can answer any more questions at the moment. So the poll question is, of the ones that I've been talking about, which of these do you find, if you've used them, which ones do you find the most interesting or helpful? And if you haven't used them, which ones do you think you might find the most interesting or helpful? And you can tick as many as you like. So I'll just give you a minute just to go through and tick those boxes. And I'm just going to go through the group chat in the minute that we've got there. Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to answer that one. So let's see where we are with that. Core practical videos. How did I know that one was going to be the most used? That's good. So that means that they're going to be the most useful, which is brilliant. It's nice to see a lot of you interested in the other things as well. So Mastery and the STEM careers posters and the videos as well. So that's really good to see as well. It's really useful for us actually to see sort of what we produce more of and what we spend more time on as well. I did see a quick question about the 2020 papers. being not secure. So just a quick note on that. The DfE mandated that the additional assessment materials should be available for all students from after Easter. So I think it was the 19th of April, so the beginning of this week. So that's the same for all exam boards. However, that is just a question. So the mark schemes are still locked. So if you download the student additional assessment materials and the additional assessment materials that have a padlock, you'll notice that the padlocked ones, which only centres can access, have the mark schemes, and the other ones are only the questions. And that does mean that students can see the questions beforehand. However, there are, I think, about 125 questions in science that we've released as part of the additional assessment materials. So I think you'd have to be a very diligent student to be able to go through and memorise all of those questions and all of those answers. So even though, yes, they have, it does mean that they've seen the questions. One, they won't have seen the mark schemes. And also there is just such a high volume of content in there that actually I don't think a student would be able to sort of go through absolutely everything. I can see something saying the presenter to advise too, but I haven't really followed exactly what you're all talking about. I did notice, Louisa, that you'd said, is there any guidance on how to differentiate between 5.5, 6.5, 6.6? I completely agree that that's a specific science tricky problem. Let me see if there's anything that I can find that will kind of help you, and what the best thing might be to try and help with that, because that's something that no other subject is going to have to deal with other than us. So let me see what I can find out, and I will send out either some documentation if I can find it, or some advice when we send out these slides, so I can give you a little bit more guidance as to how to approach that. I'm just going to go through. So this is the end of the